These are the top 5 worst Walter Benasiak performances.
What are you doing here, Heather?
April Fools!
Now that's cool. What a hack. You. No. No. No!
It's good to be back. I'm Walter Benasiak, and this is Top 5. Well, now that you've seen me at my worst, I think it's a good time to take a look at the worst of someone who really enjoyed that list. Zack Snyder has only directed 7 feature films, with his 8th, Justice League, slated for a November release. In his relatively short career as a feature film director, Snyder has polarized many moviegoers with his unique style that some love and some hate. I think we can all agree, he has at least a few decent films to his name, but what are his worst movies thus far, and do they dictate where his career is heading? A good way to predict the future is to look at the past, so let's do it. These are the top 5 worst Zack Snyder movies. Number 5, Man of Steel. So my opinion has evolved quite a bit since this movie first came out. In this modern origin story for Superman, we see a more detailed destruction of Krypton that leads into Kal-El's presence on Earth. An outcast for his whole life, Clark Kent has wandered the world as an adult, keeping a low profile and searching for his purpose. However, when he's needed, Clark jumps into action to save the day, but quickly moves on after. Upon finally discovering who he is and where he's from, Clark inadvertently triggers the arrival of General Zod and his army, who are searching for a new world to inhabit as the last remaining Kryptonians. Zod betrayed and murdered Clark's birth father, Jor-El, before Krypton's destruction. Now the House of El rises once again in Superman as he defends the Earth from these ruthless invaders. When I first saw this movie, I kind of thought it was okay. However, as time went on, my opinion on it got worse and worse. The flaws just stuck out to me the more I watched it. Upon watching it again for this list, I can't say that I've just accepted what it is. Those things that I hated before, I still have issues with, but I guess I'm just numb to most of them now. I will say, I always really liked Russell Crowe as Jor-El. I think he's my favorite part of the movie. At least he's better than Clark's Earth dad.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe.
The whole portrayal of Jonathan Kent in this movie is just way off. That's one of the issues that still bugs me about this film. Michael Shannon as Zod was fun. You can tell he's just cutting loose in most of his scenes as he worked as the character pretty well. Plus, he created one of my all-time favorite memes.
I will find him!
The ideas presented here are interesting, but executed poorly. How would the world react if Superman was real? It is an intriguing question, one that the movie heavily hinges on with its dark and somber tone. The problem is, Superman has always worked best when he's not operating in a dark or somber world. This movie is trying so hard to be an edgy, not-your-father's version of Superman that it forgot a lot of what made the character work in the first place. A perfect example of this is how well Tyler Hoechlin's Superman was received on the CW Supergirl show. That's a modern interpretation that I can get behind. And Henry Cavill is not the problem here. I think he's got the potential to be a really good Superman. He's just handcuffed by the material he's given. Everyone keeps saying, just wait, he'll be the bright Superman once he comes back in Justice League, then destroying Metropolis, killing Zod, and every other questionable thing he's done will make sense. Well, the ball's in your court, Snyder. Is that the direction we're going in with this iteration of Superman? We'll find out in November. Number 4, Watchmen. Do I hate Watchmen? No, I don't. It has its moments, as well as its vehement supporters and passionate haters. So why did it make this list? When former crime fighter The Comedian is murdered, an old teammate of his, Rorschach, uncovers a conspiracy to kill and/or discredit any and all superheroes, both past and present. As he digs deeper, he involves his other former companions to find out what's happening. The truth is not an easy pill to swallow in this adaptation of Alan Moore's classic 1987 collected comic series. I've heard the debates, I've seen the detailed articles on why this movie is a masterpiece, and watched the reviews tearing it apart. My issue with it is, besides the visuals, it's just not very interesting. I know Snyder went way out of his way to make sure this adaptation stuck to the comics as close as possible, but maybe that's part of the issue? It seems like we missed a lot more interesting stuff that happened before this story started. I know everything is much more fleshed out in the graphic novel, and from what I've heard, this would have made a much better miniseries than movie. Too bad Netflix wasn't what it is today back in '09. A big point of contention I hear about a lot is the ending. This is your spoiler warning just in case. In the movie, Adrian destroys an entire city and murders millions of people for what he says is the greater good.
I'm not a comic book villain.
The world will unite against a common enemy and enter a time of peace, he thinks. In the comics, a giant squid monster attacks New York to accomplish pretty much the same thing. The end result is the same, so does it affect the story all that much? I like Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach, but other than him, the cast just didn't do it for me, and I failed to connect with anyone. My disinterest in the characters led to a lack of investment in the movie, and it's just a chore for me to sit through. It does look really good, though. Number 3, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Disclaimer, I'm only going to be referring to the theatrical cut here. Yes, the extended edition is superior, but we're looking at the initial version of this film that was released around the world in March of last year. Due to the destruction of Metropolis at the hands of Zod and Superman, many people around the world, including Bruce Wayne, think of Superman as a threat to humanity. Batman decides the only way to protect the Earth is to destroy this threat. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor enacts his own plan to take down the Man of Steel. This movie still feels like a big old mess to me. It's not all bad, of course. As usual, the visuals Snyder creates are top-notch, and we even get a little more color here than in Man of Steel. Ben Affleck's Batman and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman also stick out as strong positives from this movie. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited for the Wonder Woman film. Batman v Superman struggles when trying to juggle too many things at once. It's trying to introduce new characters, have Batman fight Superman, set up the Justice League movie, be a sequel to Man of Steel, and more all at the same time. It's basically crushed under its own weight. Now, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor was, whether he's trying to be the real Lex's son or not, a big target for points against this movie. At least he made a strong choice, but he's pretty unbearable in this role.
The red capes are coming. Because that is paradoxical, and
Another thing that ticked me off was the handling of Doomsday. Aside from literally looking like crap, Doomsday is wasted. A character that is such a big part of the Superman lore and responsible for his death in the comics for a while should have gotten an on-screen adaptation that lived up to the impact he had. Here, he's just a generic monster created from Lex and Zod's DNA. Cavill also turned in a performance that wasn't even up to snuff with how he was in Man of Steel.
The bat is dead. Bury it.
No one stays good in this world.
Where are we?
It's a 2.5-hour movie that feels like 5 hours, and one that will have you yelling for your mommy to make it end.
Martha! 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 Martha!
Number 2, Legend of the Guardians: The Owls of Ga'Hoole. This is Snyder's only animated project. It's about the rise of the Legend of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Based on the fantasy book series by Catherine Lasky, Legend of the Guardians follows the young owl Soren who, with his brother, is kidnapped by the evil Pure Ones, a group of owls who look to unite all the different species and rule owl kind. After Soren escapes, he seeks the aid of the mythical Guardians, who have defeated the Pure Ones in the past. Together with his hero, Soren looks to save all the captured owls and make a few legends of his own along the way. The movie manages to be boring and still feels rushed with a lot of Snyder's trademarks and pacing issues. I believe this adapted a few of the books in the series into one story, and the result isn't good. Everything just moves too fast. We never get a strong grasp on these characters as they're introduced, then quickly thrust into extreme situations. The animation and character models here are very pretty to look at. They seemingly have very realistic owl movements, which is interesting to see, but it falls into a weird area. The animation is so realistic that we aren't able to see a very wide range of expressions from the models. I think the movie may have benefited from a slightly more cartoony look. Oh, by the way, Owl City contributed to the soundtrack. Because Owl.
Shipwreck in a sea of faces. There's a dreamy world up there.
There ends up being some decent action towards the end, but that doesn't make up for the undeniably dull nature of this movie. Once again, it's a world that had potential, but it just wasn't reached with the way this film was presented. At least we get to see some Snyder slow-mo here, though. Unfortunately, it's much more of a miss than a hit for Galaxy Guardians: Legends on the Rise. Wait. And the #1 worst Zack Snyder movie is Sucker Punch. Let's be honest, this probably isn't a surprise to you. After being blamed for the death of her little sister, Baby Doll is committed to a mental ward by her abusive stepfather. Thinking the real circumstances surrounding her sister's death will come to light, Baby Doll's stepfather makes an agreement with an orderly to have her lobotomized. Evading reality, Baby Doll fantasizes about escaping her situation with the other girls being held at the asylum. Here's a direct quote from Mr. Snyder about Sucker Punch.
A while ago, I had written a script for myself, and there was a sequence in it that made me think, how can I make a film that can have action sequences in it that aren't limited to the physical realities that normal people are limited by, but still have the story make sense so it's not, and I don't mean to be mean, like a bullshit thing like Ultraviolet or something like that.
Now, I heard a lot of bad things about this movie and avoided seeing it when it was in theaters. Upon watching, it's not quite as bad as I was expecting, but it's still pretty much garbage. I was confused for a bit because I didn't know Baby Doll had fantasies within fantasies. When we first see the dance club scenario start to play out, it took me a moment to catch on. It's not like the outlandish and over-the-top action scenes that are in the trailers. Those come a bit later. They're loud, crazy, and filled with the most Snydery Snyderisms I've ever seen. It was to the point where this started to look like a parody of a Zack Snyder film. With the amount of famous tracks that accompany his movies, I feel like he'd be the greatest music video director of all time. Or if he just made trailers, no one would be able to touch him. As usual, everything looks great. Zack really has the eye for composition in his shots, and I can't criticize him for that at all. Scott Glenn and Oscar Isaac show up in this movie. I always like to see Scott Glenn, so that was nice, and Oscar Isaac is a really good actor too. He has a few decent scenes sprinkled in there.
You have anything to say? Anything?
Boo, we didn't. We were just...
You know what, sweetheart? It's okay. It's okay.
Love the guy liner too. Bottom line is, the story's trying to say something and empower these girls, but I don't think it does that. Do you? Aside from nice visuals, this really doesn't have any substance. Yet, I have a feeling Zack really thought he was making something great with this. Personally, most of Snyder's movies have left me with a sense of potential, but often too many wrong choices are made because of misunderstandings or just neglect regarding the characters he has become responsible for. Hopefully, he corrects these reoccurring issues with a Justice League movie that does those characters, well, justice. I want to hear what you guys think. What is your favorite and/or least favorite Zack Snyder movie? Will Justice League be good? Leave a comment and let me know. Make sure you subscribe to my personal channel, youtube.com/awesomewalter, for more videos from wrestling to Power Rangers. Follow me on Twitter to take part in polls about what may be covered in the future. Come back next week for a brand new episode of Top 5.
Not cool. I will be back. Mark my words.